This is the Little Moments Count radio podcast, created in partnership with community radio stations throughout Minnesota. Each episode, you'll hear interviews with early childhood experts on how to support the important brain development that takes place in the first 1,000 days of life, just through little moments every day. Learn more at littlemomentscount.org/podcast.
Grand Rising, this is your community storyteller, Trill Mama, and revered MC, Shavonda Brings the Thunder, here with my co-host and KRSM station manager, Andrea Pierre, the Island Care Bear, and this is our show, Power Perspectives, on 98.9 FM, where we talk about policy, art, building power, and community life in Minneapolis. So this episode of Power Perspectives is presented in partnership with Little Moments Count. Little Moments Count is a statewide collaborative focused on helping parents and caregivers learn about the importance of brain development in the first 3 years of life. Nearly 80% of brain growth happens in the first 1,000 days, and small moments of interaction like talking, playing, reading, and singing help create the pathways that build a child's brain during this early stage of life. For more information, you can visit at littlemomentscount.org. Power Perspectives is excited to be partnering with Little Moments Count to host conversations focused on early childhood development. We'll be welcoming a new guest each month to talk about their involvement in Little Moments Count and how they view the role of early childhood development in creating bright futures and strong communities. So we have a really special guest today, Andre Dukes, who is the Vice President, Family and Community Impact, Northside Achievement Zone. And Andre Dukes oversees the Early Childhood Strategy, which focuses on ensuring that NAS scholars are ready for kindergarten through access to quality early learning centers, scholarships, screening, parent support, and education and advocacy. Throughout his career, he has learned a great deal about how experiences shape child behavior and how strong communities, environments, and supports can promote healthy development and prevent harmful behavior in children. Before joining NAS, Andre worked for several years as a community pastor and worked in partnership with Hennepin County and the city of Minneapolis on the issue of youth violence prevention. Andre holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the Minnesota Graduate School of Theology and a certificate in infant mental health and early childhood at the University of Minnesota Center for Early Education Development. He serves on the board of Think Small and is a member of the Many Minds as a part of the executive committee. Andre Dukes has spent the last decade focused on childhood development and academic success within the North Minneapolis community. He has partnered with the University of Minnesota, SED, and UROC to develop a series of parent education classes that support child development at each stage of the education continuum. He has been responsible for the oversight and implementation of the validation of college-bound babies, a curriculum designed for parents with children 0 to 3 years of age. This evidence-based model has been expanded to include 2 additional curricula, Ready to Succeed for parents with children entering kindergarten and college-bound scholars for parents of children in the 1st through 5th grades. He has co-authored a research article focused on reproductive justice issues related to fathers entitled Reproductive Justice and Supports for Young Fathers. He has also developed Proud Papa, a curriculum designed to celebrate and leverage the natural skill of fathers to enhance child development. His passion for children and families has led him to serve on the board of Think Small and Bethany Christian Services. He has also been appointed to the Governor's Council of Minnesotans of African Descent and serves on multiple committees working to empower families and create equitable and sustainable systems change. Welcome, 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 Andre Dukes. What an amazing bio.
Thank you, Shavonda. And thank you for having me. That is a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm like, do I ever sleep?
You had like
the
Energizer Bunny of bios. It just kept going.
I know.
Absolutely.
Well, it is an honor to be here with you today.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Thank you, Andrea.
Yeah, something that we ask all our guests to just ground ourselves in what is bringing you joy today, these days, or recently?
Yeah, I think children always bring me joy. I have 4 grandbabies, and I don't usually have them all with me at the same time because they are a lot. But, just when I get an opportunity to interact with them, it gives me life. One of the things I always look to in children is the aha, when they can figure things out, when they're learning new things, when they can explore. It just does something in me that ignites a fire, and that's why I do the work that I do.
Wonderful.
So, what are the age ranges of those grandbabies? You have 4 of them. You said babies, and I'm thinking they're babies.
They are. So I have a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-month-old baby.
That is so cute. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Right on. So, 80% of a child's brain architecture develops in the first 3 years of life. We talked about that a little bit before. Can you simply explain the brain science and what parents can do to maximize their child's brain development?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to talk about brain development is just recognizing that babies are born, but brains are built. And so they are built through interactions and how they engage with their environment. And so what we know is that with every interaction, there are pathways that are being created in the brain. And that's why I always tell parents that every interaction counts. So when we think about little moments count, those are interactions, and they don't have to be long interactions. They could be expressions, the way we talk to our children, just the environment that we create for our children are literally creating pathways in their brains that can lead to life success.
Wow. When I think about that, that's so wild. It's just like, whatever our habits are, their brain basically is creating memory for that.
Absolutely.
And it's going to be responding in that way. It's like they're sponges, and whatever we're giving and pouring into them, whether it's positive or negative, is what they're going to then be putting out. And so that's wild. So it's like all about perspective.
Absolutely.
If the perspective is, let me give some positive, intellectually stimulating, emotionally sound interactions to my child, even if it's just this or 1 or 2, 3 things during a day, then that is
positive interactions and positive experiences. So we think just because, we're not, having a negative conversation with our children, but maybe having a negative conversation with our spouse or a family member, that's not having an effect on them. But in fact, that does have an impact as well. And, depending on, how toxic the environment becomes, it becomes traumatic for children.
Yeah, you said that word environment, and that's just what I was thinking. So it's what we're saying to them, but also the environment that they're in or that we're creating for them, which is super powerful. Yeah, wow. Drea?
So I wanted to know more about just what you're saying, because I think it's not only talking to the child like that, but you're kind of speaking on body language.
Yes.
And how they pick up on your body language when you're in a negative situation. Can you just expound more about that?
Absolutely. I think children pick up when we are stressed. They pick up on that. They pick up, our tensions when we are angry, whether we are verbalizing that or not. It certainly has an impact on them. And so babies are feelers. And so they, can sense when something is not right. And they can feel unsafe, when they feel threatened even by our body language. And so we definitely want to be aware and pay attention to, not just the words that we are saying, but just how we show up, how we are present with our babies, and making them feel safe and secure is so important to their development across the lifespan.
Yeah, my son is in 1st grade, and they have like this feelings chart, and it's all faces, and it's different facial expressions. So just what you said made me think about that feelings chart, and it's like, well, what face am I using with my son the most, with my children the most, and whatever facial expression, because like you said, it's not only our words, but it's our body language and that facial expression and recognition. I start to think back when he was first born, and they say your baby can only see up to what your face when you're holding them in their arms. That's as far as they can see. So they're learning instantly from your facial expressions.
Yes, in the first 6 months, that is true. They rely a lot on your facial expressions, but even as they continue to develop throughout the first year, certainly though that body language plays a big part. And the thing is that they don't know how to name the emotions, right? They just see the faces and the expressions. So it's important for us to talk to them about, like, I'm happy today, and this is how I look when I'm happy. I'm sad today. This is how it looks when I'm sad. And so really giving them language to start articulating how they feel can happen in that first year of life.
I just think of that quote from Toni Morrison, "Do your eyes light up?"
Yes.
When they enter a room. Yes. And how she had that awareness, and it was something that she shared in an interview with Oprah. And so I just try to keep that in my mind, and I also think about it with the folks who interact with my children as well. Do their eyes light up? Right.
Yes. Yes.
So no,
go ahead. I'm sorry. No, I was just going to say, keep your children around positive people. It's so important.
On that note, let's take a break, and we'll be back with more Power Perspectives.
So just touching on your background in early childhood and infant mental health, how do you see the intersection between brain development and academic success?
Thank you for that question. We talked a little bit about how pathways are being created in the brain, and it's important for us to help children establish, their language. Language development is really key to academic success. And so we talk a lot with parents around not just talking to your children, but using a variety of words, being very descriptive to help them have, a vocabulary that will make them successful once they get into kindergarten. What we know is children need to have somewhere around 24 or 2,500 words in their vocabulary to be successful when they get to kindergarten, which means that they need to hear about 45,000 words in their environment. And it may not be necessarily the one-on-one, which is really the best way for them to develop that language, is to have one-on-one conversation and interaction. But, just hearing language in their environment, they need to hear a lot of words, and they can pick up on it. The thing we know about children, especially young babies, is that they can learn multiple languages very easily because the brain is developing. And so if we are speaking multiple language, and this is why there are certain immersion schools, Spanish immersion, Chinese immersion schools that are now being created, that helps with their brain development. And then when we talk about, cognition, and the cognitive development, we talk about executive functions, which are important for children when they are entering school. So being able to focus, being able to self-regulate, being able to just multitask. These are important skills for them to have once they get into school that will help them be successful academically. When they don't learn, then they certainly, and it's not that they can't catch up, but it's much more harder for them to learn when they haven't developed these skills prior to entering kindergarten. And then, we look at the social emotional pieces, because what we know is that when children feel safe, even in, environments such as school environments, that they learn better. And so we really want to make sure that, we give them opportunities to have social interactions, to learn how to share, to learn how to take turns. Yeah. All of those things are important so that, they can have positive experiences once they get into school.
Can you tell us about your work with the program College Bound Babies?
Yes, so College Bound Babies is one of the curricula that we have created in our Family Academy. And it is focused on parents with children 0 to 3. So we have a series of parent education courses that we offer that are age specific to the child or the scholar. We call all children scholars. in our College Bound Babies program, we're talking about, that language development, but we're also talking about discipline. And when we talk about discipline, we talk about it from the perspective of teaching children how to have appropriate behaviors across context. So children need to learn the difference between what is acceptable at home, what is acceptable in the grocery store, what is acceptable at school. And we have to create those boundaries and then reinforce positive behaviors when we catch them. And I love this. When we catch them doing things right, we should celebrate that instead of looking to catch them doing things wrong and punishing them for that. And so we try to stay clear of punishment and really talk about how do we reinforce positive behaviors in our children.
That was powerful right there. I think I'm just like taking that in, for a minute, because absolutely, it's like there's like this focus on wanting to like correct behavior when, it's something that's undesirable.
Right.
But that celebration that you just mentioned of the positive behavior and interactions is so important as well, that, something that I don't think a lot of folks really think about, that, like celebrating that positive. It's just like, you just should be doing this, and so it happens, and then it's something that just goes by.
And we don't understand that children have to learn the rules, right? And this is why we need to give them rules and set boundaries for them and help them to learn. When we don't do that and we see the behaviors, then, a lot of that is more about us, in terms of our desire to want to control them or to stop the bad behaviors, because we don't want to be embarrassed. We don't want to feel like we're failures as parents, but we need to know that behaviors are they are developmentally appropriate. Children will push the boundaries. They're just trying to figure out, how far they can go. And this is how we teach them. No, we can't go that far. We can't, say that here. We can't do that here. And then, really being consistent in that. And a lot of times as parents, we get frustrated when, those behaviors keep surfacing and, we want to lash out rather than just continue parenting, continue to remind them of what is the appropriate behavior, what is the behavior we want to see. So rather than say, stop running, walk, please. Can you just walk? And that's so really being clear about what we want is so important to help children learn what is appropriate and not appropriate.
So instead of the negative reinforcement, doing positive reinforcement, recognizing those positive behaviors. My question is, we have Black children that are over-criminalized, that are not allowed to necessarily be kids, to explore, to make mistakes. How do you navigate that as a parent nowadays when, the minute your child acts up or if you discipline them or something, you might be on camera, on social media, whatever.
Right.
So it's trying times. Like how can we do this and still uphold our values as, community?
Absolutely. I think, the other thing about behaviors is I always say behavior expresses need. And so when our children are exhibiting certain behaviors, there may be some needs that are going unmet. They may feel unsafe. And this is, what happens a lot of times with our children is that they simply feel unsafe. And again, they don't have the language. They don't know how to express themselves. So it manifests in these behaviors. And I think, culturally, we can't, allow those expectations to really dictate how we respond to our children. Not all children are the same. They have different temperaments, they have different needs. And so we really have to know our children. I'll give you a great example. I remember having a conversation with my son, and I was so upset. And I was yelling and screaming, and he just started bawling. And so I was like, what are you crying about? I didn't even touch you, kind of thing. You know how we talk. And so he said to me, I just don't like people yelling at me.
Yeah.
And that taught me something about him, that it doesn't take me to yell at him. Just the fact that he felt that he had let me down was enough to make him feel some kind of way, like I need to do something different. And so he doesn't want to, let me down. And that is what I've always learned, that we have to really know our children, how they respond, how they are experiencing their environment and the interactions, and really pay attention to that and respond accordingly rather than allowing cultural pressures to dictate how we interact with our children.
Something that I've been thinking about, and then what you just said with cultural pressures, I wonder, is it cultural pressures or is it societal pressures, and is it historical trauma that is really informing this need to control that you spoke of earlier, that we feel that we need to have over our kids? Drea mentioned like the criminalization of our children, but also our children are adultified, where they are not even seen as children, and so there's an expectation from society that's that looks at them and says has a different expectation for them. It doesn't allow for them to be children, but it looks at them as he's an adult. This is a grown being, and they're only 5 and 6 years old. So how do we honor and respect them as just beings? That's what I was hearing you say in your story. You were yelling at your child. They didn't respond well to that. We wouldn't respond well to that as adults. How do we respond to that historical trauma and societal pressure that adultifies our children?
Let's get into that, because I think that's so important. We parent the way we were parented. And, when we think about it from that perspective, you have to consider just how we as Black people in America have been treated, and the things that we have had to create in order to cope and to just survive in this environment of white supremacy and racism. And so, we have created protective factors. One of those protective factors is that, what stays in the home, what goes on in the home stays in the home. And so, we don't talk about, things that are happening in the home that may be traumatizing us. When we think about just how we expect children to behave and to be respectful and not speak their mind, much of that is because if they do speak their mind historically, it could cause them their lives. Now we have to have the talk. And the talk when I was coming up was about the birds and the bees. But now the talk is about how to preserve life when you are in the company of law enforcement. And so these things are protective factors, not that they are right, not they are necessary, but they are not that they were good, but they were necessary for our survival. And so part of what we are doing in terms of our parenting, and I love, there's a group that just started a work called the Black Family Blueprint.
Yes. Io and Adrian, we've had them on.
They are my brother and sister, and I love they are talking about parenting through white supremacy and all of these behaviors that we have learned that now we have to unlearn, because we're finding out that it is not doing our children well in terms of their development. But we still have to, put it into the context that, white supremacy is still alive, and there are certain things that we have to navigate in our parenting to make sure that our children are developing in healthy ways and that they can be authentically who they are. All of those things are important, but, when you talk about just the experiences that we have had as African Americans in this country, I even think about the structure of family and how, there's this narrative out there that fathers are not engaged with their children, and that most of our mothers are single mothers. And that's just, that's not true. And I think the research has begun to show that. What they don't tell you is that when they categorize family, they look at marriage as the kind of indicator. And so, yes, not every, father is married to the mother of their children, but that does not mean they're not active. That does not mean they're not engaged. And so we have to break down a lot of those narratives. And what we know from research is that Black fathers in particular are more engaged with their children than any other racial group. And so you really have to unpack the data sometimes to really get at the truth. But all of these things, really contribute to, culturally how we are parenting, parenting, what the expectations from the outer world are on, our families, and just how we are showing up for our children and showing up in our parenting.
So I have a question
Yes.
from Facebook from Felicia Perry, who
Hey,
knows
Felicia.
So the question is, how can we best support our children's social and emotional health during the pandemic? I'm struggling with how screen time has seeped into my family and wondering if he has any tips. We got to worry about a virus, violence, etc. How do we support them as we are going through so much?
Yes, I would say spending time with children is so important. Children need to spend quality time with their parents. They need to be affirmed during this time. They need to know that they are safe. And so as much as we can verbalize that, but then also create the environment where they can feel safe, where they can feel affirmed, and then having fun. I think, with all of the things that are going on in the world right now, all of the things that are coming at our children, it is so important for us to let them have fun, playing games with them, finding spaces outside to be in nature. And Felicia, I know you know something about this, but just being out in nature and creating things, keeping their minds stimulated. And yes, putting down the electronic devices. And as someone that's always on Facebook myself, I have to really take in that advice. But, I think, putting those devices around or anything that would distract us from having that quality one-on-one time and just having fun and being creative and enjoying life. I think that's how we get through any traumatic situations. And we've had 2 years of being in, kind of a traumatic situation. When you think about ACEs, one of the things that people are saying, and ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, that like every person in the world now has at least one ACE, because of the pandemic. And so, that really puts it in perspective. But, the way that we mitigate the effects of trauma is to really be supportive, responsive, and have fun.
Right. So you are the executive director of NAS, Northside Achievement Zone. What is NAS and how do folks get involved?
So I'm not the executive director.
I'm sorry.
I am the vice president. That's okay. That's okay. I had to say that in case Sandra Samuels is listening. But
Vice president.
Vice president.
Vice
Yes.
president
of family and community impact. And so, the work that we are doing in the Northside Achievement Zone is really looked at as a protective factor in and of itself, because what we have tried to create is to make sure that every family and every scholar has at least one positive adult in their life. And so we are really working to create a pipeline, a cradle to college and career pipeline that will disrupt the cradle to prison pipeline. And so we start, with early childhood, making sure that, children in that first 1,000 days are getting all of the things they need to be ready for kindergarten. And then we have, coaches that are working with families to develop achievement plans. And those achievement plans are really just, goals that they set for themselves around academics, around housing, career and finance, and even, emotional health. And physical health is one strategy that we are now engaging as well. But all of those things we believe are necessary, because what we know about trauma is that you need to have resources and assets in your environment. You need an ecosystem of supports in order to mitigate the effects of trauma. And so that's why we look at our work kind of as a protective factor for families that may be experiencing trauma. But not just that. I think that when we think about the concept of the village, these are all of the things that the village needs and provides for children that we want to make sure we continue to support in our community, is that children have a village, that they have folks that they know have their back, and create what I call healing spaces, right, that are going to be encouraging. And so we work a lot with teachers and adults that are working with children to make sure that they have training around implicit bias and, being trauma responsive and really understanding how to address the needs of our children when they're going through traumatic experiences. But we also are working with, over 30 partners that are working on housing to make sure that we can stabilize families in the community. We are a place-based initiative, and what we know that if we can't keep families stable in the community, then it's going to be hard for us to really show efficacy in our work. And so we are really working hard, and it's hard to try to stabilize families. As you know, we are going through a housing crisis right now. There's so many things that are impacting our families, but we are really trying to work hard to connect families with opportunities to, get into home ownership, to start thinking about not just, college and, trades, but, entrepreneurship. We really want to expand the thinking so that we can build the economy of our community so that children can be, can have the things that they need, that we can have great schools. All those kinds of things are important.
So we need to take a short commercial break, but we'll be back with more Power Perspectives in a moment with Andre Dukes.
So we're back on Power Perspectives, talking about NAS and the work that gets done there. I'm wondering, too, what is NAS's model and how do you measure its success?
Yes, so again, we are creating this pipeline from cradle to college. And so our big measurements is really around reading by third grade, math by fifth grade, and high school graduation, but then also kindergarten readiness. And so we really want to make sure that throughout the education continuum that children are staying at grade level and that they, can enter college without having to take remedial courses, but whatever they choose to do, they have the options and the knowledge to be able to go in whichever direction they choose.
So can you tell us about your work developing the Proud Papa curriculum?
Yes. So when I was going through my master's program at the University of Minnesota, I was learning a lot about mothers and babies and just wondering where the fathers were. And that's why I get so passionate when I talk about fathers and particularly Black fathers, because, we were just invisible, literally, in the literature. And so I wanted to create something that really lifted up the voices and the perspectives of fathers and especially Black fathers. And so I had the opportunity to write a paper with Professor Glenn Palm from the University of St. Cloud, who had been working with fathers in prison for probably 30 years. But he and I really wrote the paper to demonstrate that fathers are an untapped resource as it relates to reproductive choice and development for women, and that fathers really have an interest in the early years. And so we did a meta-analysis of many programs and just what the research said, as limited as it is, about the needs of fathers and what they contribute to early childhood development. And so we focused on fathers 18 to 24 because, what we know is that they are a representation of the experiences of fathers of all ages. And so most fathers, start to have babies, between that age group. And so when we look at, just the challenges that are present in terms of them being engaged with their children, there are many influences. It's not just the relationship that they have with the mother, but then there is the relationship that they have with the family. And then there are issues around what's happening in the community, and then systemic issues that create barriers for fathers to be engaged. And so, we have to address all of those levels in order to fully meet the needs of fathers. And so this curriculum that I created is mostly focused on early childhood, but, I really wanted to look at the full spectrum of development through late adolescence and demonstrate how fathers contribute at each stage of development. And so it is really a participatory approach. And we talk about experiences. We do a lot of reflective practice in those sessions with fathers. And we talk about, how did you feel when you first became a father? What changed in you? And what we know is that something literally changes in fathers when they become a father. Their physiology changes. Their brain structure changes because, they have less testosterone. There are just chemical changes that are happening that causes them to be more attuned. And the more that they can engage with their babies, we see these things begin to emerge. And what we also know is that as much as we see a mother as a primary caregiver, there is a dual primary role that fathers play in the attachment relationship. And so that bonding that is happening when fathers are present, children are bonding with the fathers in the same way that they are bonding with the mother, and that father becomes a primary caregiver in the life of that child. The child is expecting that father to be there. They benefit from the touch of the father. There's so many things that fathers contribute to development, but also to the well-being of the mother. And when fathers are positively engaged with the mother, she is less stressed, she has more resources and supports, and really can focus on, the baby. And so these are the things that we try to talk about. And then even as we get into adolescence, we know that this is a time where children start to shift where they are validated from their parents to peers. And so we really talk about that shift and how fathers can remain engaged and supportive and really understand and listen to their children in terms of their emotional development so that they can respond appropriately and not push them into behaviors that are not healthy for them.
That was a whole word, and I'm just gonna go back to that, fathers being an untapped resource. And we talk a lot about the change that takes place within women when they give birth, but I haven't heard anything scientifically about how fathers change physiologically how men change when they become fathers.
Yes.
Physiologically. I remember my mom telling me that when she was pregnant with me, that my dad also, he had morning sickness himself. And so that gave me that idea, but I've never heard it broken down scientifically.
Yes.
And that part about just the father being present and how that's a resource for a mother and keeps her from being stressed out, when they're positive. And I want to stress that because if you're present but not positive,
right, sometimes absence is better,
right?
So
because otherwise
I think
they
also
stress.
when you hear about men going through the change, saying that they're having pregnancy symptoms, I feel like a lot of the times we will make them seem like they're being babyish or degrade them for feeling that way, but to hear that there is actual scientific evidence backing physiological changes is very interesting to me. Also just the way fathers are treated in the hospital, especially if you're not married or whatever.
Yes.
I wasn't married when I had my children, and anybody who disrespected him was immediately checked. This is my birthing partner, this is their father, this is who is helping me through this. But it's almost like you have to really advocate for the father too as a woman. And I know it's a lot going on because you're giving birth and it's painful, but you do have to advocate for him to be present and be a part of it and to let them know this is my partner in this. We're the parents.
One of the biggest things that we hear from fathers is when they go into the hospital or well child visits that they feel invisible, that they're not acknowledged, they're not validated as a parent.
Yeah, it definitely happens.
Let's forget about the gender issue. I am a parent. This is my child. And I know something about my child, but no one is directing questions to me. No one is validating, my presence. And so that's a huge issue for fathers.
You talked earlier, too, about just village involvement. And I'm wondering, for those who don't have that positive male figure, how do you create that? What does it look like for village involvement? And basically, what work are you doing that speaks to that? I know you mentioned,
yes,
Adrian and
yes,
the work that he's doing. That's super important.
Yeah, the village is so important.
Other resources.
Yeah, no, I think that is a great question because, the reality is that there are single mothers, there are children that don't have a relationship with their fathers. And so as a father, I have to keep an open mind to say, how can I help to be an example and a role model to other children in the community at all times? There's a certain way that I need to be carrying myself and I need to respond. I shouldn't just walk past, young men on the street and not acknowledge them and not let them see themselves as invisible, because I think a lot of times, especially our young black boys, they don't want folks to know them. It's just something about the identity issue. We have an identity issue, and a lot of our children haven't been validated enough that they can feel proud about themselves and not feel like they have to veil themselves from society. And much of that is reinforced when we don't acknowledge them, when we don't engage them. So I make it a practice to say, like, if you're walking past me with your head down, how you doing, sir? Good to see you today. How's your day going? And, this is not in every case, but I think when that happens, we do have to go the extra mile. And, if we can make connections for them, if we can provide them jobs, if we can connect them to sports and things that they are interested in. And not every child is interested in sports. There are some young men that want to do radio, and how can we give them those, opportunities? And so really just finding out what they're interested in, getting to know them, what moves them, what makes them happy, those kinds of things is so important to develop relationship with our children. And it doesn't have to be my children. I say that all children are my children.
Absolutely. Come on. Ashe,
can you
amen.
give the information on how folks can get a hold of you at Northside Achievement Zone?
Yes. So you can reach me at Dukes, Dukes, at the -naz.org. That's Dukes at the-naz.org, or you can reach me at 612-239-0302.
Right on. And during this time, we have a word from our Lord, Audre Lorde, that is, which is caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. What do you do for self-care?
So I am also a pastor in the community. I pray every day. I really, what really gives me joy is when I can help other people. And so a lot of times when we think about self-care, we think about separating ourselves from people. And while that is important, when we do for others, that is equally therapeutic. So I try to do as much as I can to help other people, and that recharges me. And so, yes, I get my times away, and sometimes my wife forces me to leave town. But as much as I can, I just stay focused, I pray, and I just continue to do the work, and that is therapeutic for me.
Right on. Thank you for that. Self-care is community care. We are interdependent.
Yes.
I really appreciate that. And also taking away, too, the fathering, not only to your own children, but to children within the community, being that light for folks when they might be walking down the street and feeling unseen.
Yes.
So thank you so much for joining us today on Power Perspectives. We really appreciate having you on. To our listeners, thank you for listening to Power Perspectives. You can hear a recording of the show at littlemomentscount.org/podcast. And if you'd like to learn more about Little Moments Count, you can visit their website at littlemomentscount.org.
Yeah, thank you again, Mr. Dukes. Great conversation, and thank you for all you do for community.
Thank you so much.
Be well. Drink water, get sun. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Little Moments Count radio podcast in partnership with community radio stations throughout Minnesota. You can find the Little Moments Count radio podcast wherever you get your podcasts. and at littlemomentscount.org/podcast.